Mia flipped on the kitchen lights at 6 o'clock sharp, just as she had done almost every morning for the past 15 years. She set up the coffee maker, spooned in the fresh grounds, and let the rich aroma slowly fill the house. In the past, the smell of brewing coffee would draw Jake, her husband, out of his study with a grateful smile and a warm greeting. But nowadays, he barely glanced her way. Jake sat at the dining table, hunched over his iPad, typing rapidly. His brows were furrowed with concentration, as if he were alone in the room. "Want sugar?" Mia asked. She already knew the answer. 2 teaspoons, but she asked anyway out of habit. 2, as always. He sounded distracted, not looking up. Once she placed the mug in front of him, he muttered a brisk, "Thanks," then returned to tapping away on the screen. Mia studied him quietly. Over the past year, Jake had grown distant, coming home later, finding excuses for weekend business trips. When they did talk, it felt forced. She had tried convincing herself that it was just a rough patch, that he was under stress from new projects. But a creeping intuition told her something else was going on. It was pure coincidence that she discovered the truth. One afternoon, she went to find a financial report that Jake had promised to leave in his home office. She stepped inside to see his iPad on the desk, still unlocked. Jake had run upstairs to make a phone call, and for once, he hadn't locked his screen. A message notification popped up at the top of the display. From Rachel. "Honey, I'm so excited about how smoothly everything's going. Let me know when the divorce papers are ready for me to sign. Can't wait to be in our house." Mia's heart thudded. Our house. She felt her cheeks burn. For a brief moment, she considered closing the tablet and walking away. Yet her hand moved almost on its own to open the conversation. What she read made her stomach churn. Tender notes, intimate plans, and above all, repeated talk of a joint future once Jake was divorced. She saw references to home ownership in Rachel's name and how Jake was making sure Mia would be cut out of any rightful share. Setting down the iPad, Mia's hand shook. Her husband of 15 years was not just cheating on her. He was scheming to leave her with nothing. She glanced around the office, a space that once represented Jake's success and their shared dreams. Now it felt like a stage for a cruel betrayal. That night, she couldn't sleep. Waves of anger and fear crashed through her mind. She imagined confronting him, calling him out, maybe even throwing his tablet at him in rage. But something deeper clicked. She had to be smart about this. If Jake was prepared to trick her into signing away their house, then she needed a plan to protect herself. Mia decided first to see exactly how Jake intended to cut her off. She knew the title to their property, a spacious suburban home near Seattle, had originally been in both names. Even if they divorced, she should be entitled to half, at least under normal circumstances. But it seemed Jake had some cunning scheme to rewrite that arrangement. Over the next week, Mia used any spare moment to go through the filing cabinets in Jake's office. That was risky. He guarded his privacy. But when he left for work each morning, she had a narrow window to examine documents. Finally, in a worn blue folder, she found it, a grant deed supposedly transferring majority ownership of the house to Rachel Mitchell. The lines for Mia's signature were filled with a scrawling pen stroke that looked suspiciously like a forgery. She felt a jolt of fury. Jake is forging documents now, but she forced herself to breathe. Let the anger settle. She would need a lawyer, someone with the expertise to handle a devious spouse. Mia reached out to an acquaintance who'd once mentioned her cousin was a sharp divorce attorney. That's how she got in touch with Emily Parker, a dedicated lawyer specializing in representing spouses blindsided by wealthy or manipulative partners. In a corner booth at a downtown cafe, Emily combed through Mia's evidence. Bank statements, suspicious wire transfers, the partial deed to the house, and printouts of text messages or emails that Mia had carefully snapped pictures of. "This is definitely a case," Emily said, glancing up. "He's methodically transferring assets and forging your signature on real estate documents. You might have discovered it just in time." She tapped a finger on the forged deed. This is grounds not just for a strong divorce settlement in your favor, but potentially for criminal charges. Are you? Mia hesitated, feeling her pulse quicken. If that's what it takes to protect myself, I'm ready. Emily nodded. Start by gathering everything else you can get your hands on: bank statements, old mortgage documents, insurance policies. Even personal notes or receipts could help build a timeline. And don't confront him yet. Let's keep this quiet until we're fully prepared. Meanwhile, Jake acted like nothing was amiss. In fact, he seemed almost cheerful. He'd greet Mia in the mornings with a casual hug, compliment her cooking, or bring her small gifts she never asked for. Every gesture felt forced, as though he was overcompensating to hide something. She guessed he was trying to keep her from suspecting that divorce papers were on the way. "Hey, babe," he said one evening, sliding a box of fancy chocolates across the kitchen island. "We should take a trip. I found a great resort in the Bahamas. We could unwind for a week or two." Mia recognized this so-called vacation pitch from the messages with Rachel. Jake was planning to wave a tropical getaway under her nose so she wouldn't pay attention to legal documents. If she was gone or too relaxed, she might sign something without reading it closely. "Bahamas?" she replied, feigning interest. "Sound great. Let's talk more about it when we get the chance." Jake beamed as if he'd won a round. He brushed a kiss across her cheek and strolled away. Mia forced a neutral smile, though her insides boiled with resentment. "Keep calm," she reminded herself. "You got a plan, too." A few weeks later, Jake finally made his move. He dropped a stack of papers in front of her over breakfast. "I've decided to file for divorce," he announced. His tone was surprisingly cool, like he was delivering news that she should have expected. "Look, I'll keep this civil. I'll make sure you're taken care of. If you drop any claims to the house, I can pay for that Bahamas vacation and add a little settlement. It's fair, right?" Jake's eyes glowed with self-assuredness. Mia stared at him with practiced composure. "It's fair," she agreed softly, swallowing the urge to lash out. She'd never felt so humiliated, yet she knew that angering him now could ruin her advantage. If he realized she'd already uncovered his forgeries, he might destroy evidence or hide his money better. He flashed a smirk. "I'm glad you see reason. All you need to do is sign a few documents." She nodded. "I'll look them over, don't worry." Jake rose from the table, grabbing his iPad. "Perfect. We'll finalize everything soon." He pivoted away, missing the determined glint in Mia's eyes. They set a date for the divorce hearing at the King County Courthouse. The day arrived sunny and crisp. Mia stepped inside the courtroom with Emily by her side. Her heart pounded, but she kept her head high. If everything went as planned, she'd finally reveal the proof of Jake's betrayal. Jake made a grand entrance, wearing a tailored suit, his expression brimming with confidence. Right behind him, Rachel walked in. She clung to his arm with a smug, triumphant air. Mia felt a burst of anger, but suppressed it. "Stay focused on the endgame." Jake's attorney was a composed older man in wire-rimmed glasses named Greg Dawson. He strode to the front and spoke in a steady voice to the judge. "Your Honor, my client, Jake Coleman, wishes to finalize his divorce from Mia Coleman under amicable terms. He's offered a generous settlement, including an all-expenses-paid vacation and a financial allowance, in exchange for Mrs. Coleman's agreement to waive any claim to the property in question. Mrs. Coleman, to my understanding, is amenable to these terms." Jake and Rachel exchanged knowing smiles, as if they'd already won. The judge turned to Mia. "Mrs. Coleman, do you have anything to say about these proceedings?" Mia stood, throat tight but voice clear. "Yes, Your Honor, I do. I have documentation that I believe this court should review." She glanced at Emily, who passed a neatly organized folder to the judge. Jake shot a nervous look toward Dawson, who frowned, clearly not expecting such a move. Rachel's smirk faded at once. As the judge flipped through the documents, the air in the courtroom grew tense. Page by page, his neutral expression shifted to concern. He turned to Jake, eyebrows raised. "Mr. Coleman, Could you explain these details? I see repeated financial transactions that don't seem legitimate, along with a questionable deed transferring ownership of the marital home to another individual. Jake tried to keep his cool. Your Honor, I don't know what she's talking about. This is all a misunderstanding. My wife must be confused or mistaken. Emily cleared her throat. We also have evidence strongly suggesting that Mrs. Coleman's signature was forged on that deed, Your Honor, and that Mr. Coleman orchestrated these transfers to evade rightful division of marital assets. Rachel clung tighter to Jake's arm, her face turning white. Jake, what is this? He murmured to her through clenched teeth. Rachel, just keep calm. It's nothing. But it was very much something. The judge continued studying the paperwork, skimming lines of text messages, suspicious bank statements, and copies of official documents that Mia had provided. Mr. Coleman, the judge said at last, this looks like a deliberate attempt to hide assets from your spouse. There are also allegations of document forgery. Do you have any explanation? Jake's voice shook. Your Honor, I can't comment until I speak more thoroughly with my attorney. He cast a glare toward Dawson, who said nothing, as if realizing the case was far bigger than he'd initially thought. Emily kept her tone measured. Given these findings, we petition that the court declare the deed invalid, restore the home to joint ownership, and require Mr. Coleman to reimburse any assets wrongfully moved. Furthermore, we ask that an investigation be opened into potential fraud. Mia took a steadying breath. She couldn't believe they were actually pulling it off. Rachel, meanwhile, had turned on Jake in a fury. Are you kidding me? She hissed. You swore the house was practically ours. You told me your wife was clueless. This is turning into a disaster. Jake yanked his arm away. Could you not? He growled under his breath. The judge rapped his gavel once. I'm going to need time to review these materials. We'll continue this hearing after we've allowed proper discovery of the financial records. In the meantime, Mr. Coleman is prohibited from transferring or selling any property. Court is adjourned. As everyone filed out, an officer stepped forward, addressing Jake. Mr. Coleman, I'm at the County Fraud Investigation Unit. We have a few questions regarding suspicious transactions flagged by the IRS. We'll need you to come in for an interview. Rachel gaped. Jake, what? You said everything was legal. Jake's face was a mix of panic and anger. He looked from Rachel to Mia, then back to the officer. This is ridiculous. I need to speak to my lawyer. The officer shrugged politely. We'll let you do that, sir. Dawson hurried to talk strategy with him, but the damage was done. Media cameras, alerted to a potentially sensational court drama, snapped pictures. Furious, Rachel shoved past them, ignoring Jake's attempts to catch her arm. She wanted no part of scandal, apparently. Mia watched them from across the corridor, her heart pounding with exhilaration. The truth was coming out. Jake was questioned at the police station that evening about unreported bank accounts and forged signatures. By the next morning, rumors were already swirling in local business circles. Jake Coleman indicted for fraud. No one wanted to be affiliated with him. Whatever deals he'd been working on evaporated. Even the so-called friends who had once praised him distanced themselves, and Rachel was nowhere to be found. A day later, Mia stood on the porch of her home, glancing around at the neatly trimmed lawn and flower beds she had planted herself. She was flooded with relief that she hadn't signed anything blindly. This house was rightfully hers as much as Jake's. Perhaps soon it would be hers alone, or at least she would have enough leverage to maintain security in her life. She gazed at the dining room window, remembering all those mornings spent pouring coffee for the man she thought she knew. Emily visited that afternoon to go over the next steps. We'll finalize the divorce in a separate proceeding, she said, flipping through notes on her laptop. Given the fraud allegations, the judge is likely to grant you a substantial share of the assets, if not everything. It just may take time as the investigation unfolds. Mia exit, shoulders relaxing. I'm prepared. I've lived with enough uncertainty for a year. I just want to get through it. Emily nodded. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but you have a very strong case." The corner of Mia's lips curved in a small smile. At least now, there's a clear path forward. Far across town, Rachel paced a rented studio apartment she'd hurriedly leased after fleeing Jake's place. She'd counted on him to secure their new life. Fancy home, big bank accounts, the freedom to travel. Now she was stuck with no job, no safety net, and the looming threat that authorities might question her, too. She was livid at Jake for dragging her into a mess she only half understood. But a deeper part of her felt shame. She'd known he was married, known it was all underhanded. Yet she'd allowed herself to get swept up by the promises of wealth and comfort. "What was I thinking?" she asked herself, remembering how smug and triumphant she'd been in court, certain that Mia would just vanish. Even her own mother, whom she finally confessed everything to, scolded her. "You don't chase after a married man for money, Rachel. He'll say whatever it takes, and you'll end up with nothing." Standing by the window of her dingy apartment, Rachel recognized the truth in those words. Now, she had to start over, carrying the stigma of this scandal. If only she'd realized earlier. But regrets wouldn't fix her situation. Jake spent sleepless nights in a small holding cell downtown, waiting for bail to be arranged. He couldn't stomach how quickly his flawless life had crumbled. He cursed Mia for bringing everything into the open. He cursed Rachel for betraying him with her outbursts. Most of all, he cursed himself for not being more careful. Days later, out on bail, Jake tried calling Rachel. No reply. He tried contacting old business associates. They brushed him off. Without the veneer of success and solvency, he was just another guy facing charges. His empire, built on cunning illusions, was destroyed. He stared blankly at the few messages on his phone. Every apology text to Mia went unanswered. "She's done with me," he realized bleakly. "And I'm on my own." Mia finished talking with a detective from the fraud squad one cool morning. He left after collecting some final statements and bits of evidence. As she closed the front door, she realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. Once paralyzed by the fear of losing everything, now she felt stronger each day. She discovered that she could stand up for herself, that she wasn't just a housewife stuck behind Jake's shadow. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed. It was her best friend, Hannah. "Mia, how are you holding up?" Hannah asked in a bright voice. "Surprisingly okay," Mia replied. "Everything's chaotic, but Emily says we're on track for a favorable ruling." Hannah let out a relieved laugh. "Knew you'd come out on top. By the way, if you need any help searching for a job or a fresh start, say the word. You've always been organized. Maybe you could get into event planning or interior design." Mia felt her spirit lift. "You know, I've been thinking about something like that. I have a whole list of ideas I want to explore." Hanging up, she strolled around the living room, remembering earlier days when she decorated the place with excitement and pride. Now, it was a symbol of what she could overcome. She realized she had been diminishing her own abilities for years, thinking her primary role was to keep the house running while Jake handled the finances. Now she saw the skill and creativity that had always been inside her, waiting. Standing at the mantel, she traced a finger along a framed photo of them from a happier time. On a trip to Yellowstone, both beaming. The memory was bittersweet. She allowed herself one final moment of nostalgia, letting the pang of loss wash through her. Then she set the frame aside. It's time to move forward. That evening, Mia's phone rang from an unknown number. She answered, expecting maybe a telemarketer. "Mia." The voice was unmistakable. Jake's. He sounded defeated, possibly a bit desperate. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for all this. I never meant for it to go so wrong." She inhaled sharply, unsure of how to respond. She remembered the years together, the sense of partnership that once existed. Could any apology fix the deliberate lies and betrayal? "You made your choice," Mia replied, her tone firm, though a trace of old hurt lingered. "I was ready to stand by you for life. You're the one who threw that away." Jake's breath caught on the other end. "Can you at least forgive me?" he pleaded. I've lost everything. Rachel's gone. My business is wrecked. I know I messed up. Mia closed her eyes, feeling surprising calm. She wasn't sure forgiveness was the right word. She felt no burning desire for revenge now. That had passed. We both have to live with the consequences, Jake, she said. I've made my peace with it. Then, gently but decisively, she ended the call. She sat there for a moment, letting the weight of finality wash over her. She didn't hate him anymore. Instead, she felt a quiet acceptance. This chapter of my life is closed. Over the following months, the divorce case moved toward resolution, bolstered by overwhelming evidence of Jake's fraudulent activity. The house deed was declared invalid, restoring Mia's rights. Jake faced mounting legal battles over forged documents and financial crimes. Rachel all but vanished from the city's rumor mill, presumably trying to rebuild a life of her own. For Mia, a new life was dawning. She took steps to renovate the home, painting the walls lighter, rearranging furniture, decluttering the space to reflect her own style. Whenever she felt discouraged, she remembered how much she had endured. If I can handle that, I can handle almost anything, she thought. She began exploring new career possibilities. Event coordination, interior design, possibly starting a small business. She didn't have the final plan yet, but she brimmed with a sense of possibility. Freed from Jake's manipulation and illusions, she could shape her world on her own terms. One crisp morning, standing in the freshly painted living room, Mia placed a hand on the window pane. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the yard. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin. It's truly mine now, she thought, reflecting not just on the house, but on her life. Now for herself, not for the man who never appreciated it. The comforting smell enveloped her. Staring at the rising steam, she whispered, "Thank you," though she wasn't sure to whom. Perhaps to fate, perhaps to her own courage, perhaps to the swirl of events that, painful as they were, gave her a second chance. Mia sat down by the window, sipping the coffee slowly. The days of quietly serving Jake in the shadows were behind her. I'm done looking back, she told herself. It's time to move forward. And so she did, step by step, day by day, embracing her newfound freedom, healing from betrayal, and daring to imagine the brighter paths still ahead. That's the end of our story. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Your feedback means a lot to us.